which they said, well, if something is, you cannot name it, then maybe you can make a picture. So they just stopped writing philosophy, but just made different kind of diagrams and images and this kind of thing. And it's quite interesting because in philosophy we often have the problem that writing is linear, and actually we want to express something non-linear, right? At least circular or some. Actually, it's always like a spiral, more, I'd say. So I think the imagery is quite interesting, actually. Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, to make it a bit less super academic and also accessible, and also more artistic in a way, right? It's also more artistic. Yeah, yeah. We can just go live and continue talking. Because do you need a second or? Because I thought that in Western philosophy in general, there's always this idea um, that this pictorial thinking, this image thinking, is actually not appropriate for philosophy.
Yeah, yeah,
There's a
that
lot
is
of criticism from all kind of uh, the big philosophers. They always criticize this as yeah, the imagination is never enough to reach the idea of the concept, right? The concept must be a word
very
somehow.
strict, yeah, in some way,
Yeah,
not artistic and so on. Really
and that's
bullshit.
interesting. And even the really artistic philosophers like Deleuze is also against it, actually. Um, but especially in Hegel, he always in his lectures on the history of philosophy, he always criticizes when philosophers start to think in images. That he says these are like metaphors. Even the mystics he likes, um, he still always insisted, no, but this is not proper. This is not proper philosophy. Um, when you talk in this poetic kind of terms.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess we're going to cover this problem also, so
Mm.
we could plastically start in a minute, I guess. I'll
Mhm.
wait for people gathering. Hello, everyone who are watching us now. We're going to start, as you've heard, in a minute, or even less, maybe.
Mhm. Must be fun seeing us now. Totally meditative moment. It's today there's a talk on mysticism and silence, so we're not going to talk today. Just sitting here.
Yeah, it's a great performance even. To complete maybe for better understanding, better creation of a certain life within an idea of mysticism. As sometimes we're covering the ideas with words, not the interaction. So yeah, it's a great thing. Okay, but I guess we'll try to talk for a while, just for.
We try to talk in order to destroy language.
Yeah, exactly. That sort of stuff. No less, no more. That's it. Yeah, and for getting some alternative ways, I guess, within the goals of language. So, yeah, there are people coming. Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're glad to see you. And so, then I'll announce the very beginning, as usual, of our event. So, hello everyone, and dear rule, today we are having the second part, but it can be certainly an autonomous one, as the very core approach of philosophy we are talking today with is too autonomous for being in a mixture with something. So there is a talk about mysticism, and you are, probably being here on Counterculture Philosophy Club. So all Counterculture Philosophy lovers, welcome again. And I'm being here as the stabilized front person of this club, Chiron theorist. And here we're having today our dearest guest, Hannes Schumacher, and we'll try to elaborate on some ideas that we've covered lately and try to market even more intensively. The structure is the same. I mean, of our time we're going to spend here, the sort of a lecture part and the discussion part. Feel free to answer, to ask all the questions you want to. We'll try to answer them. So, Hannes, hello. Really great to see you and hear you again. And I'm sure we'll have a great time in rediscovering the new and reforming the boundaries of what we name and mark as something new, actually. So, you can start, and then we'll plastically, let's say, move to discussion section.
Yeah, well, thank you. That's the general overview, but again, I'd say it's going to be a messy talk and also an open talk, so you're really invited to ask questions in between and get the discussion more vibrant also between us. I don't want to talk all the time, so feel free. As you said, this is a second session in relation to the one we did last week, and but indeed it's also autonomous. So thanks for those who were here last week, and especially I wanted to thank you for the amazing discussion and the really striking questions last time, and also to the newcomers. Hi. Let's see how it goes. About last time, maybe I can sum up a bit. That we went into the question of what could be a contemporary counterculture, and I immediately came up with another term, encounter. If maybe in the encounter is also a counter, and this encounter was understood as an encounter with the weird, with whatever we call strange, and I related this to what I call the our onion bodies. This is an idea that our bodies and our minds are always living in so many, we're all stuck in so many different layers. And I've been, in relation to this, I've been reading Deleuze and Guattari, especially the Thousand Plateaus. They talk a lot about these different layers, what they call the strata. Strata are different layers or lines which on all different levels in our mind, in society, where we're stratified. And the idea of the counterculture or encounter culture, I'd say, is really to overcome a lot of this strata and break free. And I also thought about the onion. It's an interesting process of peeling yourself in a way, because what comes out in the end is that actually an onion only consists of all these layers, right? There's never the core in the end. So in a way, when you remove all the layers, nothing comes out again. So it's a kind of in a way, you're getting more and more naked in the end. However, there's nothing left. Well, almost nothing. That's then the big question: if, let's say, the world was created from nothing, as they say in Christianity, the creation ex nihilo, or actually the idea that it was created from chaos. And actually, always when we create something, this creation is totally based on the chaos, and that's an idea I also want to talk about today. And Babylonian myth came to my mind in relation to this being naked. It's about a goddess who wants to go to the underworld, and she's as a goddess, she's sort of a queen, right? A goddess is even more than a queen, and a queen is dressed in many things. A lot of jewelry she has, but since she wants to go to the underworld, one cannot get into the underworld with all this clothes and nice clothes and jewelry. So there are certain gates. You always walk further into the underworld, and then comes a gate, and you cannot pass this gate without getting rid of one part of your clothes. And of course, the clothes in this case are very symbolical for status and for your personal identity. So at every gate, she has to get rid of an earring, and then her crown, and then it's a bit frustrating because again the guards they ask her for something else, and in the end there's nothing more to remove, right? So she arrives in the end in the underworld and is wholly naked, and this makes totally sense because in a way she totally got rid of her personal identity. She's not even a goddess anymore. And I think this is also an interesting parallel to our idea to really give up all our personal, to not take ourselves so seriously. Also, as they say in a lot of Buddhist philosophies, that basically we are nothing, right? We're nobody. And this is not something depressing. That's just an interesting way to get rid of a lot of this strata and so on. And I think we will come back to the onion today in terms of some imagery I prepared. Just for short, the talk today is called the ominous 12th thesis of absurdist mysticism, which is due to many questions came up last time concerning these 12 theses. So this is in a paper I wrote on absurdist mysticism, which relates absurdism. So this is the theater and literature and philosophy around Albert Camus and Beckett, especially Waiting for Godot is the famous one. And I tried to relate this to a much older, much bigger mystical tradition, which goes through the whole history and everywhere around the world. And the ominous 12th thesis reads, think God is even greater if he does not exist, if he is not himself a being. The true difference doesn't lie between atheism and religion, but between orthodoxy and mysticism. And today I really want to deeply zoom into this only one thesis. The idea that God is even greater if he does not exist. And I think with my example of the onion and the getting undressed, it is also clear that God will, of course, also lose his gender. God is not a he or not even a she. So I think that this approach is also interesting in terms of contemporary queer studies. And on the other hand, I think it's also an interesting approach concerning much of contemporary metaphysics or ontology, what is so-called speculative realism or speculative materialism. To get started, I have two funny texts. Well, I find them funny. I went a bit in some actually what we consider as very boring kind of philosophy the last weeks, which is this kind of philosophy I always try to avoid. It's the dark Middle Ages, right? The medieval philosophy. And when you get deeper into it, you also start to ask yourself, well, why is it always considered as dark, right? Now we are in the good time. Now we are enlightened after the Enlightenment. And the Middle Ages were so dark. It is true that these texts are, they're all the time they're talking about this God and always struggling with not being heretic or blasphemous and so on. There's never the opportunity to go into an extreme atheism or pantheism or whatever. So it's always more or less hidden because of the authorities. But I want to show you a text. Wait, I'll share the screen. It's that one. Wow. No, again, I don't see it. Wait a second, please.
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
This one. Okay.
Yeah, it's downloading. Okay, here it is. Nice.
Well, this is just for fun, but especially in relation to the neti-neti we were also talking about last week. Neti-neti is a concept from Indian philosophy, which means neither nor, and we figured out that this is very much responding to our professional and personal lives. Always the idea to say not this, but also not that. Always to try to go somewhere in between. And now this very boring kind of philosopher I want to talk about is Nicholas of Cusa, or Nicholas Cusanus, who was living in the late Middle Ages, and he wrote a lot about God, obviously. And he wrote an interesting and funny dialogue called De Deo Absconditor, on the hidden God. And that's a dialogue between a pagan and a Christian, and the Christian obviously tries to convince the pagan of the great truth. But we will see that this truth is actually very different from our standard understanding of Christianity. So the pagan is really nice. He says, I ask you, brother, to lead me to the point of being able to understand you regarding your God. Tell me, what do you know about the God you worship? And the Christian says, I know that whatever I know is not God, and that whatever I conceive is not like God, but that God excels all this. Says the pagan, therefore God is nothing. And the Christian, it is not the case that he is nothing, for this nothing has the name nothing. And the pagan, if he is not nothing, then he is something. He is not something either, for something is not everything, and it is not the case that God is something rather than everything. And says the pagan, you make strange claims that the God whom you worship is neither nothing nor something. No reasoning grasps this point. Well, it is very strange, and no reasoning grasps this point.
Pagan roasted the Christian, I guess.
Exactly. But I mean, now forget about the Christian and the pagan. That's somehow something we encounter very often, that people tell us, well, what you think, the way you think is very strange, in the sense of, this is very stupid in a way, something you didn't understand, so you didn't get it. If it's not something, it must be nothing, and all this binary logic. But they go on, because the pagan is very open also to the weird. And he says, can he be named? Christian answers, what can be named is small. That whose greatness cannot be conceived remains ineffable. And the pagan, but is he ineffable? And of course, again, not. He's not ineffable, though he is beyond all things effable. For he is the cause of all nameable things. How is it then that he himself, who gives to others a name, is without a name? And says the pagan, so he is both effable and ineffable. And of course, this is again not the case. Not that either, for God is not the foundation of contradiction, but is simplicity, which is prior to every foundation. Hence, we are also not to say that he is both effable and ineffable. And here it becomes more logical, the discussion. We see that Cusanus here accepts, in a way, the problematic of contradiction. He says it's not about a contradiction. It cannot be both, because it would be contradictory. So we also see that his kind of reasoning maybe is not understandable for everyone, but we see that actually it goes beyond, it understands the binary logic, but also goes beyond it. And this is also an understanding, a general understanding in so-called negative theology, that two different kind of negations. And says the pagan, what then will you say of him? Well, is there something to say? Only something very complicated. That it is neither the case that he is named or is not named, nor the case that he both is named and is not named. Rather, whatever can be said disjunctively or conjunctively, whether consistently or contradictorily, does not befit him because of the excellence of his infinity, so that he is the one beginning which is prior to every thought formable of it. Blah blah. Says the pagan, so then being would not befit God. Says the Christian, your statement is correct. So here we are entering a different terrain, because nowadays we would simply call this atheism, right? So then being, so basically, so then God does not exist. And the Christian says yes. And here it becomes interesting, because many people uttering these kind of statements, of course, got burned on the stake. While Cusanus, actually, he was not very troubling for the church, interestingly. Now, after all this discussion goes on and on and on, and in the end, there comes the funny, for us, funny kind of resolution. Says the pagan, therefore may God, who is hidden from the eyes of all the wise of the world, be blessed forever. So in the end, he's actually convinced of this God, because this God is so weird. Somehow he, in the end, he agrees. And it's not convincing him of the Christian belief, but convincing him really of something totally different. It's just something which cannot be said precisely in this medieval Christian context, in which whenever you say something wrong, you get burned or whatever. Now, much more spicy, I think, is Nagarjuna, who is actually the most influential, the most important Buddhist philosopher. He comes from South India, was living much earlier than Cusanus. He was actually the founder of so-called Mahayana Buddhism, which then developed much further into China and also Japan, and all this development also in the end led to what nowadays we know as Zen Buddhism, which is then, once again, all this Mahayana context is then very much related to Nishida, who is an important philosopher I will talk about afterwards. Now, Nagarjuna wrote this amazing book, which is called Mula Madhyama Kakarika. Very nice title. It is translated as the fundamental verses on the middle way. It's always about the middle way. And although this sounds a bit maruli, as I say, it sounds a bit soft. Always, this balance, very Aristotelian. Actually, Buddhism should rather be understood as a revolutionary movement in the Indian context, and did not really survive in India, while actually traveling more to the east. Now, this is very similar to Cusanus. Nagarjuna, less blah blah, more directly to the point. He talks about nirvana, which is considered as the goal of the enlightenment of in Buddhism. He says nirvana is not existent. It would then have the characteristics of age and death. There is no existent entity without age and death. So he's simply arguing and saying, well, nirvana is beyond this age and death thing, right? That's always the understanding of nirvana, to be outside of it. But then he goes on and says, if nirvana were not existent, how could it be appropriate for it to be not existent. When nirvana is not existent, it cannot be a non-existent. And this becomes, the translation becomes difficult, the argument becomes difficult. The point is, I also had if you look at the original Sanskrit text, the point is again that there are two different kinds of negations involved. You can also see it here. Not existent is saying something else than non-existent. When you say something is non-existent, and again, in the realm of being again, and here again, Nagarjuna says this cannot be the case. Now, of course, also not both, as in Cusanus. He says if nirvana were both existent and non-existent, passing beyond would impossibly be both existent and non-existent. And here I think it's again also the understanding of the binary logic that I think also Nagarjuna respects the idea that the contradictions are wrong. He says it cannot be, nirvana cannot be both, because this would be simply contradictory. But he even goes one step further than Cusanus, because Cusanus said, well, God is neither existent nor existent. But Nagarjuna goes even further and says, nirvana is said to be neither existent nor non-existent. If the existent and the non-existent were established, this would be established. This is now, without the context of the whole book, difficult to understand. But the point here is that if the existent and the non-existent were established, so if both were established, this would be established, neither nor. And this is simply logic. This is also discussed in contemporary formal logic, for example, that the both and can be logically transferred also into a neither nor logic. Basically, it's logically equivalent. And he says, so the neither nor would also be contradictory. So, you see, in Nagarjuna, you can actually repeat it again. It's just simply he didn't do it because it would get redundant. But I think the idea that would be, you could also about this neither nor, you could also go even one more step further and again put another neither nor, and so on and so on. But we already see that this neti-neti approach is so extreme. So in the end, even what Nagarjuna calls emptiness, even this final concept itself is empty. And his conclusion of all this is now the proper, the mystical truth. This is the kind of truth which should actually rather be hidden. This is always the idea of the mystics, that some truths they're so ultimate, but they're also so dangerous that they should be hidden from the normal people. He says there's not the slightest difference between samsara and nirvana. There is not the slightest difference between nirvana and samsara. And usually samsara and nirvana are understood as the complete opposite. Samsara is understood as the everyday life world, and nirvana is actually the way out of it. But Nagarjuna really gets to the point to really, I wouldn't say identify them, but to say that there's not the slightest difference between them. But is again a mystical stance which comes very close, I think, to Cusanus. But you see, it's not exactly the same thing. Like in Cusanus, it's not exactly atheism what he's doing, right? Also here, it's not Nagarjuna is not an anti-Buddhist by saying that samsara and nirvana. Some historical refreshment introduction to my own paper I've written on the topic. I now stop sharing. Are there any questions already? Because I'm just getting into the waterfall of talking now.
Hi, no, that's fine. But still, there are some aspects to cover and to discover, especially related to the points of the dialogue, the first dialogue with the Christian and the pagan. An impressive one. It's hilarious in some way, and still fulfilling the regimes of God and the God as if God were a real object, a real in very closed way, like if God was considered to be stated very as something simple and I'd say too lively for not being catched, and this logic makes the dialogue even more hilarious. As the God isn't God actually as approaches and the visionary mixture of approaches that state I guess one of all the possibilities to sum up actually the visionary acts from ourselves. So there are several ideas on it. So I recall that I'll even try to read out loud my notes that I've been doing during your talk. So yeah. Well, God helped me to understand what my scratches really mean. That's a funny thing also. So God is an absence.
God help you.
Yeah, God will help me. That's it. I hope for that. We'll try it at least. We'll test it. Yeah.
Does God help?
Yeah. That is.
I think no, God does not help. But
well, we'll try, actually. If I get it, then God helps. If not, so he doesn't. Simple experiment. So, I guess God is a sort of an absence, actually, as you stated it, and I fully agree with this position that he's even greater when there is even no God in a very standardized way, in a very concerned categorization. And God should be seen as an absence. That is because it is a united construction that also serves us as a certain way to save the action, overall action as a categorization. I mean, action from being personalized. And it's an interesting thing that we state the being through different contexts and concepts that are saving us from integration. That's a certain viewpoint. And in this case, the world can be seen as real only if we sort of mixture the restriction with the actual vision and processing the material that is outside from us. What do you think on it? What do you recon?
it's sort of an outside, let's call it an outside, right? This God is, because there's so much problems in philosophy since Kant, that everything, whatever we encounter, is always somehow inside consciousness, inside the human realm. Everything is constructed, right? What I actually love is constructivism is an amazing kind of worldview. But at the moment, everyone is struggling so hard to find a kind of relation to the real. Also especially in the Lacanian sense, the real outside And I think that exactly this kind of God in this mystics is actually the only thing which could be considered as an extreme, as a radical outside, right? And this is maybe referring to your question about the, I don't know how we could use that or feel it in the everyday life also. Or, there are also always the questions of political dimension and so on come up. I think it's a very interesting direction, because it's like something which can never be grasped, right? So of course it follows this idea that you can never be whole, right? You can never.
That's it.
Should I go on to put it more in the contemporary philosophical context?
If you like, it would be interesting.
Okay, I can continue with the.
There is a question in the chat also.
Okay, let's go for the question, and then I can go into the contemporary philosophy.
Yeah, sure. So question: are nirvana mechanism existent, non-existent, similar to Christian Trinity, human and human God?
Thinking. Yeah, well, first of all, the nirvana samsara are two, right? It's not a trinity. The trinity is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right?
Yeah, essences actually.
But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe we can try to do it with some, a weird Buddhist Hegelian kind of trinity understanding. We can also go deeper into that. Because you can say that nirvana, in this sense, especially when nirvana is considered as not different to samsara, actually you get the point that, so maybe nirvana would be kind of the father, and samsara would be kind of the son, right? Although actually I would say that nirvana is rather the mother, and samsara the son. And yet the point of reference, understanding the Trinity in a post-Hegelian style, would be really to say that the samsara is the expression of the nirvana. That the nirvana is this extremely chaotic kind of state, and samsara is the same, but expressed in terms of differentiated world. But that's why you can also say they're the same, because they have the same materials. It's simply that samsara is somehow the outside perspective of nirvana, right? Nirvana is the impression, and samsara is the expression. So you can say, exactly like with the Trinitarian idea, that they are the same but different, and that's the main point, right? Because we don't want to get rid of differences. We want to celebrate the differences. So we don't want to unify them, right? But at the same time, also difference only makes sense in relation to this unity. So there must also be a unity of differences in this sense. But this unity, as I said, should not be a whole anymore. That's for sure. And that's why the idea of chaos and also nirvana, I'd say, is in a sense very different to the father, to the traditional father, right?
Yeah, that's more restrictive rather than willing and given. Yeah, that's really opposite tradition and the way of acting, the way of posting your way towards somebody else, actually. If we a bit elaborate on this exact distinction a bit more, also as for the God in a very Christian way and in less Christian way, with the sign of Christianity in our minds besides the tradition. If we try to state let's say, the phenomenon of God to this extent, God. Unbearable. I'll also say that God as a function, if we name it this way, sort of marks the action that is in the present sense in an individual, I guess, and it is so because of the future. So the God actually forms the holistic ability, and this holistic ability never really states itself, and there is no such thing as a holistic world, actually holistic being, because of this reframed representation. There's God, how could I say it?
You mean that God is somehow the
using
whole we can never reach
for making it holistic, just in mind for, let's say, avoiding the real stabilization of the sign and the thing. Yeah, so God actually reframes the time for restating the way we connect things. And before we construct and reconstruct God in our talk, in our being, as there's a function of our own reunion with ourselves within the absence that we actually face every day, daily. Yeah, what do you think on it? I guess it's a close vector on the, gripping perspectives we can actually gain and maybe get from the God discourse in a new way that you are talking about, actually.
Yeah, I think there are two different understandings also of holism nowadays.
Yeah, definitely.
So it used to be, holism used to be this great idea that let's not analyze all the time. Analyzing means somehow cutting and considering the parts, right? And the parts then make the whole, more or less. And the whole, the whole is always more than the part, right? Than its parts. And this is also an ideology, right? This is also this utopian, this aggressive, dangerous idea of utopia. I think what starts again with Hegel a lot, that it can be fulfilled somewhere in the future, and then it also goes on in Marxism that there's this ultimate goal.
I'll criticize myself later. Continue.
And because of this ultimate goal, the wholeness, we rather get much more stuck in the means to get it, right? And this is the problem which happens with in all these kind of projects, because we have so much this utopia in mind as an ultimate goal, as a whole, complete wholeness, and then it becomes destructive. And the new kind of maybe I should also say this before, that following this ideology of wholeness, what happened first in philosophy was a cutting, a fragmentation. no one didn't want to do
definitely
any systems anymore, right? The system was bad. Everyone wanted to be fragmented, and the philosophy of difference became very strong. But I think nowadays, especially in relation to ecology, we're starting to develop a new kind of wholeness, which is less destructive, right? Which can also be utopian, by the way.
I fully support it, and by reframed and even repostulated future, I meant something different. That's the new way to form the holistic aspect, as there is a tradition that makes us interested in holistic spheres, actually. So that's the regime how we view life, but the vision cannot be let's say doubled. It's unnecessary case, but in all or in a lot of at least ideologies, it is like a necessary case to follow the visionary, our visionary, I mean, in other aspects, in other contexts. Like, why should we double our, processes in a real life? Like, okay, we need to form the holistic inner ourselves. Why should we do it, in the outside? And I guess the new understanding of God, actually, like the certain form of getting the action, makes us wondering. Well, not wondering, but makes us present besides the future. So the God is the future, as not in an ideology term that something will happen later, but it is always present because of the holistic thing that we, I'd say, deserve and redirect to God. So we redirect some processes to this, I'd say, not him, her, somewhat, to God, actually. And therefore we can stay actually too present for being ideology, for being in an ideology, actually. So we, reframe the way we act towards our inner processes because of, I'd say, restating the meaning and the position of such a big concept that is a big one because of its unlimited possibilities, not actually because of restrictions it can name and postulate in front of us. So I guess that's an interesting thing to mention and to elaborate on. Some alternative ways to construct the social aspect, social sphere, are coming from it, and as well as just refreshed, visionaries on the world, on ourselves, as we can be personalities with no actual central point of a personality, and that is a Buddhist thing, and still be, the constructing force. I guess that's the real man, the goal. Yeah, sort of that.
So when you talk about the future, it's a sort of I understand as a future we have in the present, right?
Exactly.
Basically, this infinite possibility. Yes, you can also frame it in this direction. That actually in every moment the world is exactly not deterministic. Actually, in every moment there are infinite possibilities, which is exactly the openness of the future, and this would be in this terms would be God, right?
Exactly. The principle.
I mean,
principle. Yeah.
I really also understand this as the what they called in medieval philosophy the omnipotentia of God. I really like to reframe this exactly in the term of that everything can happen, actually. That's the omnipotent, right? The radical contingency. Basically, randomness itself is a sort of fate. Should I continue with the?
1 moment.
With the paper.
There is one more question. Thank you very much for elaborating this. That spread it and expanded. So yeah, there is a question. Any thoughts on ontological argument?
Yeah, that's the next.
Okay.
Let's get into this and then.
Okay.
I am perfect. It's a good starter also for everyone to get into it, because I've written this paper on the ontological argument.
Okay, great. So
it's called
continue.
Divine inexistence and the ontological argument. Now, for most philosophers, the ontological argument is a well-known concept. Basically, you just say the ontological argument is. It's considered to be a proof for the existence of God. The ontological argument for the existence of God, usually, and this is in the Western history of philosophy. They basically categorized 3 different ways to prove the existence of God, and the weirdest is the weirdest is the ontological one, because the ontological one it's not a real argument. I mean, it doesn't consider any empirical facts. It's simply an argument which argues from the concept of God in order to prove the existence of God. What is of course confusing everyone throughout the history of philosophy. In the end, it was by Kant. It was simply put aside and disproved. But I also don't think that this one makes sense. And I had a look at the earliest version of this argument in the middle of the Middle Ages. You cannot get any darker or any more boring, so to say, than this philosopher called Anselm of Canterbury, who came up with this argument. And I read his introduction, and actually the introduction is so beautiful. It's very contemporary. And then suddenly he comes up with this argument, which is very sophistic in a way. And his argument is basically that he says, think, God is so great, it's always greater than you can imagine. So since God is greater than only being in your thought, God must also be outside of your thoughts. So God must also exist. So in short, the argument is, I mean, this is it's in Latin and it gets very complicated, and there's this reductio ad absurdum of the opponent on this. But basically it says, God is so great, he must exist. That's the point of answer. And I ask myself, yeah, well, does even this make sense, right? Let's not go too deep into the argument itself. But why he thinks that to be is something so great. So I decided to turn the argument around and make something completely new out of it. And I also formulated my own kind of argument. I don't want to get into this today because it's very paradox. But I actually argue, and this is then this zoom into the 12th thesis. I actually argue that it's the other way around. That it's actually for something to be the greatest, this actually means that it does not exist. And I'd like to go a bit deeper into this, what this actually means, because I'm not simply, like Cusanus, I'm not simply arguing for the non-existence, but for not existing. So this actually means that it does simply not belong to the realm of being. And the realm of being, since Kant actually it's getting less and less and less important. It's not so fabulous anymore to be. There's still we still call it ontology, a sort of metaphysics which deals with the on, which is the being in ancient Greek, ontologia. But it's more about the question, when you go into Heidegger, it's more about the question what does it what is the being in these beings, right? Yeah, you always have the capital being and the beings, the many beings. There are das Sein und das Seiende. The Sein are the many beings. And to start with that, I just asked the first question: what does it mean in contemporary philosophy to be great, right? To be the greatest? And this is obviously a very, an argument with a lot of feeling. In the Middle Ages, you had a lot of this less mathematical, less philosophical terminology, like the greatest, right? The biggest and all that, and it's more metaphorical, so to say. And it simply say that to be the greatest means to be ontologically primordial, ontologically prior. So on whatever kind of hierarchy you can form in terms of ontology or metaphysics, it's the first principle. That's the greatest. It's primary, not secondary. And concerning this, I had a look into 3 more contemporary thinkers, and for this I want to show you this image I made. But again, it doesn't pop up. Oh yeah, now I got it. So you can also delve into this weird image and don't have to look at me all the time. Here we go.
Yeah, he really is. Nice. I'll repeat it.
This is an
it really is really fulfilling the approach to a visionary through the depiction of relations within the given. So yeah, continue please. Great.
Thank you. HND. H is Heidegger, N is Nishida, and D is Deleuze. And I think these 3 are somewhat the most interesting, more contemporary philosophers in this regard. So let me guide you through this diagram. Right? You go in the bottom left corner. This here, the thing looks very similar, right? It's being, beingness, and being, and I hope to develop this, that it's getting more, also the language itself has to become more differentiated. In relation to the ontological argument, right, of Anselm of Canterbury. Heidegger has this general critique against most of scholastic medieval philosophy. He says that, yeah, well, see, you scholastics, you always say God is the greatest. So, and you also like this this being thing so much. So the scholastics simply, they just add more being, kind of the quantity of being. I am, and I don't know, this cup here exists a bit less than me, maybe. I exist more. And then, I don't know, then the angels, they exist more than me. And then, in the end, there's God who like really much, really hardcore exists, right? And Heidegger says, what's this? You're just building this strange kind of hierarchy. Why should there be this decrease of being? And what is so special about this being, actually? And this is this kind of beingness, actually, Seienheit. And this is a weirdly constructed word. But it's on purpose, because it's really a very strange kind of thinking, that God would be the most existent, right? And Heidegger's answer to this is actually that being, the capital being here in the corner, does itself not exist, actually. So you have the beings all around, and this is the realm of being. Also, non-beings belong to that. Also, in reference to Nagarjuna, what we saw. Also, the non-existent and also the existent is in there. Now, the scholastics, including Anselm, they make up this so-called beingness, which is like an extreme of being. But outside of all this realm is what Heidegger calls capital being, the sign. And this is you see, it's outside of this whole. The terminology comes a bit more interesting. Actually, for everyone, we can ask ourselves, what is actually to be? What is existence for this philosopher? For Nishida, who is the most important proponent of the Kyoto school in Japan, for him, to be means to be emplaced. He has this concept of basho, the place, and to be is simply to be somewhere, to be in a place, right? Now this basho, this place, Nishida also calls absolute nothing. It's different to relative nothing. Relative nothing is all kind of consciousness is actually relative nothing, and that's why it's also very similar to Heidegger's beingness. Relative nothing is relative because it's only nothing in relation to being, and being is being in relation to nothing. There's this double dialectics going on. It's absolute. It's not in relation to something anymore. So I don't know. It's not clear why he calls it absolute nothing and not just the absolute. But also capital being in Heidegger, he also equates a lot with the nothing. So we see a lot of similarity here. And of course, this absolute nothing in Nishida is also, it doesn't exist, right? It is itself the place which emplaces whatever exists in the end, right? And more creatively, I try to do a similar in the upper right corner, a similar understanding in Gilles Deleuze. It's more creative because for Deleuze, the main thing is always that the difference is more, it's more important. Difference is primordial, ontologically primordial to identity. That's always his main point, right? And I think he more or less neglects also a third term, which I'd call chaos. Also, Deleuze talks about it. For Deleuze, actually, to be is something very low in the hierarchy, of his metaphysics, and to be is to be self-identical, actually. And this is in a world of a lot of flux. Actually, to be self-identical of petrification. It's more like it's like the dead end. Right? To be is something very. That's like that's really boring, right? It's something very lively becomes dead. Basically, that's being, that's identity. While difference always comes prior to identity and makes identity, and this is also the realm of what he calls becoming. And I'd integrate a third term, chaos, which I think is the most appropriate for also what Heidegger calls being and Nishida calls absolute nothing. I think chaos is actually the most interesting mixture of this absolute being and absolute nothing kind of understanding. Now, what Nishida actually brings here in the right corner, in the bottom right corner, what Nishida brings actually to the ontological argument is that only that, like in Heidegger, that the absolute does not exist, but it's also, it doesn't belong to the realm of being, but it's also that it cannot even be thought, it can only be experienced. And what Deleuze actually brings to the discussion is his concept of virtuality, of, as you said before, the potential. He puts this already on the level of difference. There's a field of a differential field which has all these possibilities for forming becomings and identities. And this is something actually, as I said before, I would put together with this idea that God is omnipotent, right? There's this absolute possibility. And in terms of difference, it's not yet absolute. It's you see some differential processes going on already. While in terms of chaos, there's really absolute possibility. There's not only this is impossible and this is possible and so on. It's so radically contingent that you really can speak of a sort of an omnipotence. And therefore, I mean, if I put, as I do in my paper, if I put all these three together, I get to the point that the really paradoxical point that God firstly does not exist because he doesn't belong to the realm of being, e.g., right? Secondly, God is also unthinkable, And thirdly, nevertheless, God is omnipotent, because this is this extreme radical possibility. Well, I can just finish with the discovery I had today. Is that this image here, of the yin and yang. It's actually only one part of the yin yang, but you see in the yin yang symbol, there's in the yang, there's always this drop of the yin, and in the yin there's always this drop of the yang, and it's the same kind of thinking that around this egg here, it's black, and also here in the center, which I've called the event, because I think the event is always the sort of you cannot say resolution. The event is always the peak in the ontology of all the three, Heidegger, Nishida, and Deleuze. But it's, you see, the event, it's not a law, right? The event is something momentary, more or less, or it's always a sort of becoming. And the idea is that through the event we always get related back to the chaos, back to the absolute, because the event is, as Nishida says, it's the eternal now. So the understanding that we can actually find eternity exactly in the now, right? So there's a sort of a bridge all the time between the lowest and the highest, whatever you call lowest or highest here. And secondly, thinking about all these onions, I had a look at this image here, and it's sort of an onion, right? But with its layers. Here's one layer you can get rid of, and here's also another layer you can get rid of.
And
that's the idea,
an egg, sort of. You know, in Chinese mythology, there is such a thing like the very first human, and he was born from an egg, as far as I remember. So it's very close to that, according to some, visionaries we can construct. Yeah, continue, please.
I mean, there's also the theory of the golden egg, for example, in mythology. Also, Deleuze talks about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, in this case, it's like an egg because it had to fit into the screen, right?
Yeah, and also it's like Russian matryoshka. The woman in a woman, and there are lots of women.
Oh yeah.
That sort of stuff. That's
another good example, right? You open up, and then there's nothing. But what's this nothing, right? It's actually this nothing here. The event basically is referring you always back to the absolute nothing, which is around, right? Yeah, so maybe to conclude, maybe the point is to not only get rid of identity, to not only overcome the rule of identity, but maybe the ultimate goal of mysticism is even to go one step further, to really celebrate the difference, but consider it as a sort of final layer. You have to not only tolerate the difference, but also celebrate it. But in celebrating it, in a way, we also reach a point in which the samsara is indifferent to the nirvana, and as we said before, the father or the mother is in the end indifferent to the sun or to the world, and so on. So I stop sharing, and then I'm open for.
Okay. So. Yeah, that's it. I'll fix it.
I hope I answered the question concerning the ontological argument.
Well, we'll ask now. Several moments. Sometimes the translation, serves faces worse conditions than previously, and we should wait for reloading the overall existence of us. Yeah, there is a tech gut definitely that sometimes makes alternatives maybe for reintegration into nothingness beyond the given abilities to reconstruct the interaction. So sometimes tech gut really it's everything and all that really matters, and he decides all the stuff. We cannot contradict him. I cannot, definitely. Like, okay, Nanat. Like, if you like, if you want, what could I do? Nothing. Definitely nothing. So yeah, thank you very much. It was even more impressive. In terms of, I'd say, formations. Of the celebrating the visionary contradictions as an overall element of something bigger in terms of reconstructing the direction for getting the sense. So yeah, it was fulfilling. Thank you so much, deeply thank you. And there are a lot of questions connected to the part you presented today and presented now, and some also thesis. Okay, talks to pronounce, to announce, to pronounce for more fulfillment, discussion, and formation maybe of our own way to recover the holistic experience of getting the ideas. So I guess I'll start from some points of mine. Actually, there were a lot of them, and still one of the most crucial ones is this. Maybe the absolute, that is too, as you've mentioned, is too crucial and too stricted in tradition, I mean, and in different approaches and ontological systems that are actually given from some philosophers, from the past to us and for us. But maybe, yeah, as you marked it, absolute should be seen more plastically on the one hand, and on the other hand, absolute is a stated formula of maybe finding the concrete elements of nothingness, and therefore the very first layer of being is not even being, and being is a sort of preferable semantic lie maybe for making us possible in the impossibility, for making us stated in an impossibility. Like there is nothingness, and but nothingness is a source for variations. Therefore, we should celebrate the difference, and therefore difference really actually exists as a as an ontological and even not only ontological categorization, as you named it. So yeah, maybe the being and the central maybe attention that is historically present and still lively, engaging us into variable discourses and so on of being is only in a real case, and in present is only a way to hide the actual point where we construct our I'll repeat it for being more definite as far as I can do this, more maybe constructed in an action. Like the being is a layer that makes it possible to stay for us in an impossibility. So the dichotomy a bit changes, and the ontological statuses and actual places where being and non-being and different beings that are more crucial, more vital for us, are really of a paramount importance, restates their and reframes their stabilizations, and therefore we should reunite also the way we see the absolute and the way we confront the absolute. Maybe we are in an absolute, and all of our actions are only, the possibilities and the tries maybe to overcome the absolute, to reach something very local. So, like the history says the opposite. We are being too local, and we are, serving the God, for example, and we are trying to reach something bigger than ourselves. But maybe the very core definition of something bigger of ourselves than ourselves, God, it happens, it should be different. What do you think of it? I guess it's a perspective way to, reunion and reform the some basic illusions we're facing in life, and we're trying to fight through philosophy.
Well, first of all, being is great, right?
Wow,
Being is
impressive.
I'm not here to say that being is something bad, right? All these Gnostic visions.
By the way, if you say that being is bad, YouTube will block us, so it's okay. You say that, yeah. Yeah, continue, please.
So we are beings, and we are definitely not miserable or something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that's the first and maybe most important point to make, also in reference to a lot of ancient mysticism, which was always opposed to the Christian and also opposed to the Platonic idea, was that the world is something bad, right? And that's why we should actually go back to a state before the world, which is like going back to the absolute. Whatever. Now we change the absolute, right? It's not an idea anymore, but it's chaos. But it seems like very similar kind of thinking. And here you also have to see, yeah, right. That's also not interesting. First of all, being is great, right? But this doesn't mean that it's the greatest. So the second idea is that we also shouldn't make such a big fuss about this being thing. It's really enough. Also the terminology of ontology, I think it's really over. But you still wrote this book, Being and Event, which is great. But why still always this relation to being? I mean, for him, being is also sort of a void and something very different. Capital being like in Heidegger. Then also this would be the third point, talking about the absolute. Yes, we have a wholly different idea of the absolute. As we said before, it's not a whole, but in a way, an holistic understanding, which is in a sense the opposite of the whole, because it's never the complete. It's never able to simply summarize the world, so to say, right? And here I think, especially the terminology of Nishida is really helpful. It can also confuse, but the main idea is to say the absolute is nothing, right? The absolute, and not even philosophically, just simply put, the absolute, that's nothing. Okay. And then again, it's not nothingness, right? Yeah, it's just nothing. This helps in order to understand a new kind of hierarchy, which I think is important. We always try to get rid of hierarchies completely, and it often fails, right? Also, getting rid of hierarchy would be to get rid of all differences, for example.
That's it.
And this, maybe if you put all this together, your idea of the local is actually very interesting, because I asked this myself also. What to do after all, right? Just go, just being interested in this absolute and getting rid of everything else. Actually not at all. Actually, you have to think this bridge, and that's also the difference from standard atheism. You have to think this bridge that being through difference is the actual expression of the absolute, and the absolute is actually, as long as it's not expressed, it's nothing. It doesn't appear. Being is the appearance of the absolute itself, and that's why you see it's a turning of the hierarchy. Actually, it's totally balanced, because the absolute, which used to be on the top and with the content, now doesn't have any content. That's why we can also say it's nothing, right? While being, which used to be understood in this hierarchy of different modes of beings, and the absolute is the most existent and all that. Being is simply appearance. It's simply the appearance of the absolute, but it's also the appearance of the absolute, right? Being is, so to say, the absolute, and this is how we can understand the local, right? Because by understanding the local, by working in the local, by really taking the local seriously, basically we also take the global seriously, because the local is always an expression of the global. Well, to call it local would be a bit too cliche now.
Yeah, maybe.
In terms of philosophy.
I've heard, a better way to state it, maybe, glocal, like the mixture of words. And the local is, it's still underrated, and it doesn't, the local itself reframed its own position as its totality gets people ignorant to the local, besides the fact that the local is the all, actually the all we're living in, and we're trying to maybe to restate in different varieties, besides the vectors we're choosing in life in an ordinary sense too, as well. So I'd say local. I love local because of the unopened problematic of getting the sense of it. but maybe glocal is better, as it serves the the very first point of our speech and of the talk where in a general sense elaborating on and producing like local is a mixture of big senses, and therefore it is, and that's the crucial point for getting any further. As for some aspects you named, mainly I agree. Definitely. And there are some, notes to make additional considerations on that. Stream. It should reload itself. It happens for some reason. I don't know why. Okay, we're still here. Whew, God. It's so stressing. Every time it happens. Okay, still we're fighting the existence with glocal being, in this exact context also as well. The mission of a warrior has no end. Yeah, that's it. And God maybe is glocal too, in terms of how it's, this, you got it, actually. They actually represent themselves, besides the characteristics given and so on. So points, straight to them. I guess it's often a perplexing work, sort of, and it makes us wondering and makes us feel the complication of a world when we are facing the ability of naming the neglection. I'll try to elaborate on it more definite, in a more concrete way. By being, I guess there is a hidden dichotomy in a being. Not from the outside vision of being, but from the inner sense and inner structure. Being is always marking itself aside from the actual processes it depicts, and therefore the real being is also glocal, and can only be glocal when we neglect the visionary absolute as something that actually contains our glocal. Trying to reformulate new word into my vocabulary. So the absolute being really doesn't contain the glocal beings, and this non-containing relation makes it possible to to construct own spheres for every the glocality, and it plastically moves forward to another idea that can depict the way how we could probably fight the problem of being against the hierarchy and still being in them, as if we are the same. How can we be not in a hierarchy? Very simple problem that practically is still present. I like the concept of I'll try to form it. Horizontal elitism. It means the first point is from Kant, and it's not that bad that we're equal because of our differences. Great one, simple one, and still great one. And also the real ability of being equal is to form our own choices of the basic positions we're getting, like positions in I'd say it's still in this term, ontological way of how we represent our inner sphere, like the world we make outside from us and for us only, and these formations are constructed from possible inequalities, but these inequalities are only markers for starting your own and autonomous growth of the locality. It can be, visionary. It can be constructed like a line with points, and these points can become, figures, and they are different. They're different in terms of the size and also the angles they are constructed from, and but the line is still one line, like the being itself, as a possibility, as a process that was given for us, for reuniting our inner senses and so on and so forth. That sort of stuff. And therefore we are equal because of the possibility to reframe the universal place we are in a very individualistic way, and therefore we should celebrate the difference, as difference makes it possible to be united. And I guess that's the good model for really for naming the new social construction and the thinking construction beyond people. And also it is a locality itself. The way and the ability, the very basic, the very core ability to formulate your own sphere that would be more preferable than the abstract absolute given being. Absolute is nothing, and therefore you can be local in your own formation. So and therefore being in my usage, the previous usage I mean, was marking its abilities with no pause. We could probably in a very sudden way get from absoluticizing and romanticizing the being as something big. So true being is a process we can construct in a locality that was a locality previously. That sort of stuff. What do you reckon? What do you think?
I don't know. I said so much already. I think you gave a good summary from a different perspective. God, it's so much.
You can, if you want to mark something, if you don't want it, it's okay. We can go to questions. But it would be interesting for me to hear your comment on it. In every sense we could possibly imagine. So you could name something very definite and concrete, not all the paragraph I've made. I know it was a big talk, therefore it's hard to concentrate.
I think
on it.
It was a big talk, and it can also stay there for its own right. I don't have to.
Okay. It's a good compliment. Thank you. But still, there are some questions for further aspects, so maybe we'll return to them in different regimes. So
exactly.
Okay.
Maybe we can come back to it, right?
Okay. So should I go to the questions?
Sure.
Okay. So do you practice occultism or some kind of
occultism? Sounds like magic, right? Some kind of
witchcraft.
Witchcraft. Yeah, well, it's, this magic is usually understood as a sort of way to convince the gods, right? And it's a pretty egoist kind of thinking. Kind of I now need this, I want that, or it's like a prayer which is only asking for something, like oh God, make me rich, or practicing magic. It doesn't go beyond your ego. Basically, something practical which you do, and someone is convinced that it works. So no, but I find rituals very interesting, and especially in the artistic context, because rituals are a very interesting way for people to get together. Yes, so there are maybe two understandings of magic. One is also that, as Kafka said, I think that poetry itself is already sort of magic. So maybe this is all part of a general understanding of all kinds of magic, not to reduce it to just nothing, right? It's usually the deductive modern scientific approach. Magic is just all the Christian again, right? It's the witches, and we have to burn them.
Yeah.
But also not to celebrate it as something totally paranormal, right?
Okay.
It has a lot to do with alternative modes of consciousness. Also, it has a lot to do with people getting together, with presence. Also, music. There's a lot of magic happening, and then depending also on your state of madness or drunkenness, and also it works better, right? And this is also not to say that it's ridiculous, right? It's I think that the madness and the drugs and all that changing the consciousness also simply brings you in the right kind of mood to understand magic in a different way.
Okay, great one, thank you. So, moving forward, what is morally good for mysticism on ethics and mysticism, sorry. Yeah.
What is morally good for mysticism?
For a mystician. Yeah. On ethics and mysticism.
Yeah, mainly it's especially with this relation to the relation I pointed out in relation to Nietzsche, for example, and also the absurdist tradition. I'd say absurdist mysticism is not moral at all, because it doesn't have any. It doesn't accept any kind of laws, especially not moral laws. Because this is exactly the wrong kind of thinking to make something which is to make something spiritual which is going on in our mind an outside law. No, actually outside is again only nothing, right? And this, so morality is especially a condition which rather makes us sick. It causes mental illness, especially in the northwest of the world, to speak globally. I think it's very, very problematic. While because it's always taken as such, with such a rationalistic understanding, and taking a lot of very abstract examples which then in practical life don't work out. So first of all, the ethics of mysticism is an anti-moralism. But then of course there's, because mysticism, through all its negations in terms of logic, of course it is very open to empathy, especially to really extreme kind of empathy. It's also, in a sense, it's also a naive kind of ethics, right? It's not an ethics which could be systemized, I think. It's not a Kantian ethics which respects the individual. I mean, which respects also the individual, the human person, in a completely different way than an animal, for example. It's also not an utilitarian ethics which aims for the best results in terms of happiness and so on. It's also not pragmatic like in Spinoza. It's kind of ethics which doesn't really look like an ethics, but it's very rationalistic. But I think it has some potential, especially in terms of this so-called unification always in this, right? When I basically feel that I am you and you are me. I think that's actually the most interesting approach to ethics, basically.
Okay, yeah, really gripping. The way we see how things actually melts and maybe in redirecting the essence, and therefore the empathy as a very core principle of getting the difference, for being sure you get the essence that is in front of you is crucial. And that's maybe the core of any ethics at all. But ethics are more formalistic, in consequences. But the very core is, the principle you named, I guess. It's interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's the core. Maybe it's my general critique of moral philosophy is actually that it works this way around. But basically, you have a feeling of what is ethically good and what not, right? Then you translate this feeling into something rational, and then you push it back into the action. And that's this huge bridge. It works on the level of law, right? As long as there's a law, but in concrete everyday life, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, definitely. So we can continue. Question: why God is a possibility? Maybe God is also impossibility.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of this terminology also in sound studies about the audible, and then there's also always the inaudible coming in, as well as in philosophy, the possible and the impossible. I think we're entering two different registers of terminology here. In a sense, I totally understand what it means that God is the impossible. It's in terms of what we usually call the possible and what is possible and what is not impossible and what is necessary, right? It's a very common understanding that some things, it's kind of transcendental structure, which basically tells you some things are possible and others not, right? Something is possible to do it, in other things, the overcoming capitalism and all these things, it seems rather impossible, and that's why it makes sense to celebrate exactly for that reason. And also God, this understanding of God is also impossible because it goes out of reason, right? Like the pagan in this dialogue said, well, this it's too much for my mind, it's impossible, right? But then there's also this shift in understanding. Maybe it's the difference between potential and pure possibility, let's say, or the virtual, actually, when you go with the Deleuzian terminology, that you see the potential is a very Aristotelian concept. The potential is always something you can do, right? You have the possibility to do it, and this is already something. But it's also always limited, because usually you learn a skill and then you can do it. You can do something, but all the others not, for example. So again, something is you're potent to do this and others not, and so on. And then they say, well, God is omnipotent, right? But this is then again this understanding of God is even more potent than he's like the most skilled, like the most existent and all that. No, actually you have to see it more. To have more possibility, actually you have to become less masculine, less potency. Actually, a child has much more possibilities than a grown up, for example. And that's why also this relation to the egg, right? You mentioned before. It's a possibility in this kind of terms. And in this kind of terms, after this change of terminology, so to say, there's simply no impossibility. So when you enter the impossible in the first terminology, as soon as you enter the impossible, actually this impossible is the absolute possibility of everything. So it's the contingency, actually. Yeah, well, I don't talk further because it's getting complex now. And then we end up in reading Hegel together and Maya Su, right?
Okay. Great one. Thank you very much. It's okay if you continue. It's fulfilled. Reframing the aspects of telling, actually. So it's good. Yeah, it's also interesting, in case of taking the God as a possibility for allowing us to stay impossible and for viewing. Yeah.
Exactly. You got the point.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So we'll move forward. We have one more question. Yeah, that's a point that we mentioned right now, I mean, is really crucial, but it's too big for mentioning. Yeah, that's the point. So, the last question. And I guess it was the question was solved in a chat. Like, did I hear correctly that absurdity is nothing? Absolute is nothing. So we have, I guess, no more questions. and we're strict to the timeline even, which is weird in lots of good ways, as weird always is, actually. So I guess we can end the presenter digging into a topic just for now, and with the possibility and impossibility as well to leave our viewers in their own inner acts of thinking and overcoming the aspect that were presented. So thank you very much for being here today. It was a great pleasure. It was impressive as always, and lots of intriguing lines were named, and also I'd say redirected for lots of elements of further investigations on a level of lots of alternatives we could probably construct within the modern philosophy. Okay. I'm talking to a chat. Nice. Bye. Thank you too for being here.
Thank you all.
So would you say something in terms of goodbye for the audience?
Well, yeah. Thanks again for having me. I'm glad that we have discussions, right? That it's not just a bold and very official presentation, and I can also offer my doubts here in my own approach, and it will be understood, and there can also be confusion. And I'm impressed that the questions are always so accurate.
Yeah.
Sometimes funny, but always very related, and I think we got it in a good frame today. I would love to expand a bit on your long talk before, but I think it's we're fine now. Well, what I got would also be maybe a way of continuing such a kind of discussion would then really to go into the concrete interaction and connectedness of everything.
Truly,
and this is actually what I got out of and now remember of what you were talking about in terms of this hierarchy, anarchic hierarchy, and horizontal understanding. In what terms is it horizontal? Especially this idea that everything is connected to everything. Also in the Buddhist context. So we're talking about appearance here, and then especially this maybe to this last question, if the absolute is nothing. Yes, in the sense that it's not something, right? Yes, in the sense, or no, in the sense that it's a chaos, which is something positive. First of all, we only through our language we understand it. The other way around is something negative, because it's always negating our cosmos and the being in a way. Well, actually, we have to see that it's maybe the other way around. That actually there's not really negation. That also being is not really negating chaos, but that they are also interrelated. And in this sense, maybe that the absolute is nothing. Exactly the expression of this extreme interconnectedness, right?
Yeah, sure. Really fully support you, and from my side and from our side, hope for further relevance or real investigations in this field of really unopened and unrealized. Because of absolute is nothing, that it is not something definite. Therefore, it can be actually ours. Glocality, guys, as it is. So, thank you again very much for being here. Dear viewers, thank you for watching us. You could be even more active than you are. You are staying silent. The most percentage is always silent, especially in the lecture section. Like there is 100 personalities here watching us now, but there is a certain percentage of active group of people that are really engaged in a discussion, in a lively discussion. So feel free to answer any questions. Don't feel hesitant or something. And it was counterculture philosophy. The stabilized front person of it, Chiron theorist, it's me, and Hannes Schumacher. So all the links will be below in this video, in the description. And we are telling goodbye and